Tonight, we step into the humble home of one of Rome's most revered leaders, the quiet farmer turned statesman, to hear the Final Testament of Cincinnatus. So, without further delay, let us explore the rich tapestry of history. I feel the weight of my years pressing down upon me as surely as the plough once pressed into the rich soil of my lands. My breaths come shallow now, each one a labour greater than any field I ever tilled. The physician says I will not see another harvest, but I, Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, am not afraid. What Roman fears the natural order of things? We are born, we serve, we return to the earth. The cycle continues. My family moves quietly around my bedchamber. They have gathered from across the countryside, coming to witness an old man's final days. Their whispers reach me like distant thunder, respectful yet tinged with the inevitable grief of farewell. My daughter Quinta sits beside me, her hand resting on mine. Her face, weathered by decades of sun and wind, bears a striking resemblance to her mother. Rasilia has been gone nearly 30 years now, yet not a day passes that I don't feel her absence. She was my rock, when Rome called me to service and when I returned to my plough. She did not live to see my final years, but her wisdom guides me still. The Senate has sent another delegation, Quinta murmurs, her voice carrying the slight disapproval I've come to recognize in her. She inherited her mother's forthright nature. They wait outside. I manage a smile. Even as I die, they cannot leave an old farmer in peace. You were never just a farmer to them, she replies, adjusting the woolen blanket across my chest. Perhaps she is right, though in my heart, that is all I ever wished to be. The politics of Rome, the glory of command, these were duties I accepted, not honours I sought. My son Titus enters, his hair grey with age. Father, shall I tell the senators you will see them tomorrow? You need rest. I consider this. At 83, with death's shadow lengthening across my threshold, what difference will a day make? Yet the thought of political discourse now wearies me beyond measure. Yes, I reply. Tomorrow will be soon enough for Rome's business. When he leaves, I turn my gaze to the window where I can see a sliver of my beloved fields. The wheat stands tall, nearly ready for harvest. I planted those fields as a young man, watched them yield their bounty year after year, returned to them after each time Rome called me away. They have been more constant than any political alliance, more honest than any Senate debate. I remember the day the messengers first came, finding me behind my plough, shirtless and sweating under the spring sun. How long ago was that? Nearly 50 years now. I was in my prime then, strong from daily labour, my hands calloused from honest work rather than gripping the hilt of a sword. You're thinking of that day again, Quinta says, reading my expression as easily as a clear sky. It changed everything, I reply, though I never wanted change. My mind drifts to those pivotal moments that shaped not just my life, but the very character of our republic. The memories come unbidden now, flowing like the Tiber after spring rains. I see Rasilia as she was that day, emerging from our modest home as she watched the approaching senators. She knew, before any words were spoken, that our simple life would be interrupted again. "Rome calls," she had said, helping me remove my sweat-soaked work clothes. "You must answer." No protests, no tears, just the steady strength that defined her through all our years together. I close my eyes as fatigue overtakes me. The past and present blur together, scenes from long ago as vivid as this morning's sunrise. I hear Quinta speaking softly to someone, perhaps a grandchild come to inquire about my condition. Their voices fade as sleep claims me, carrying me back to simpler days when my greatest concern was whether rain would come in time for the spring planting. My last thought before darkness descends is of my fields, not the Senate, not the armies I commanded, but the straight furrows I ploughed year after year. There is truth in such simplicity. There is honor in returning to it. The morning light filters through the window, waking me from dreams of distant battlefields and Senate chambers. For a moment, I forget my condition and attempt to rise as I have done every dawn for decades. Pain lances through my frail body, a harsh reminder of my circumstances. "Easy, Father," Quinta whispers. "The physician left a tincture for the pain." I wave away the offered medicine. "Pain reminds us we're alive, daughter. I'll have few enough reminders soon." She helps me sit upright, arranging pillows behind my back. From this position, I can see more of my farm through the window. The stone walls I built with my own hands, the olive trees I planted when Titus was born, the small shrine to the household gods where we've made offerings for protection of our lands and family. "The Senate delegation is already waiting," Quinta informs me, disapproval evident in her tone. She has her mother's forthright nature. "Let them wait," I reply. "I wish to speak with you about matters more important than politics." My words seem to please her. She sits beside the bed, her work-roughened hands folded in her lap. Though born to a patrician family, my daughter has never shied from labor. Like her mother, she understands that true nobility comes from character, not circumstances. "I've been thinking about your grandfather," I tell her. "Your father," she breathes. "You rarely speak of him." He was not a man who would have wished to be spoken of often. He believed in actions, not words. The memory of my father comes clearly now, a stern patrician of the old school who taught me that privilege brings responsibility rather than entitlement. I was born into the Quinctian family, descendants of Sabine nobility who had been among Rome's leading citizens since the early days of the Republic. Our name commanded respect, but my father ensured it was respect earned through service rather than merely inherited. "Your grandfather taught me to plough before I learned to read," I tell Quinta. "He said a Roman nobleman who couldn't work his own land was no Roman at all." Those early lessons shaped me more than all the political education that followed. I learned that a straight furrow requires concentration and patience. that fields must be tended daily, not merely during planting and harvest. That nature cannot be bullied or bribed, only respected and worked with. These truths served me well when I later faced both Senate intrigues and enemy armies. I met your mother when I was 20, I continue, smiling at the memory. She was helping her father bring olives to market. I saw her arguing with a merchant over proper prices, refusing to be cheated even a single aes. Her determination impressed me more than any noble lady's refined manners. Quinta smiles. Mother always did drive a hard bargain at market. Indeed, I courted her properly, though it wasn't easy convincing my father that a woman without noble ancestry would make a suitable wife for his son. But once he met Rasilia, he understood what I saw in her. Strength, honesty, practical wisdom. Our marriage brought me greater joy than any political achievement. We built our life together, season by season, child by child. First came Queso, my eldest son, then Quinta herself, and finally, Titus. We lost 2 infants between, a sorrow common to many families, but no less profound for its commonality. My thoughts turn to say so, and the smile fades from my face. Quinta notices immediately. You're thinking of my brother again, aren't you? She inquires softly. I nod. The pain of that memory has dulled over the decades, but never truly healed. Say so, my bright, ambitious firstborn, whose temper and pride led him to disaster. He became entangled in the political struggles between patricians and plebeians, accused of murder by his enemies. Though I believe he was innocent, the charge found willing ears among those who resented his arrogance. I stood before the comitia, offering my property as surety for his appearance at trial. 10 guarantors I found, pledging the enormous sum of 30,000 bronze ingots. But Saso, frightened despite his bravado, fled before his trial. He escaped to Etruria, leaving me to face both financial ruin and the shame of a son in exile. That day changed us, I tell Quinta. We sold almost everything to pay the forfeit. From comfortable wealth, we fell to working a 4-acre farm with our own hands. Some patricians would have considered such circumstances unbearable. Many would have sought political revenge, or used their remaining connections to restore their fortunes through questionable means. I chose a different path. I learned then what truly matters, I say. Not wealth or status, but honest work, family loyalty, and personal integrity. When we lost our grand house and most of our lands, I discovered I needed very little to be content. This lesson served Rome well, though I didn't know it then. Had I remained a wealthy, comfortable patrician, perhaps I would have developed the same taste for power and privilege that corrupted so many of my peers. Perhaps when dictatorship was offered, I would have been reluctant to relinquish it. A fit of coughing interrupts my reflections. Quinta quickly brings water, supporting my head as I drink. When the spasm passes, I feel weaker, the morning's exertion taking its toll. The Senate delegation, Quinta begins, can continue to wait, I finish for her. First, send in my grandchildren. I would see their faces this morning. She nods and goes to fetch them. While alone, I gaze again at my fields through the window. Those 4 acres, all that remained after Seso's disgrace, taught me more about governance than any political office. A small farm demands careful management. Resources must be allocated wisely, work distributed fairly, long-term needs balanced against immediate desires. The same principles apply to ruling a republic, though few politicians seem to realize it. The door opens, and my 6 grandchildren file in, from Lucius, now a man of 35, to little Marcus, barely 7 years old. They arrange themselves around my bed, their faces solemn yet curious. To them, I am both the frail grandfather who taught them to identify birdsong and the legendary figure whose story is taught alongside Rome's founding heroes. Come closer, I tell them. I have something important to say. They lean in, eyes wide. Even Lucius, who has heard many of my stories and lessons, appears eager. Remember always that you are Romans, I say, my voice stronger than it has been in days. Not just citizens of a city, but heirs to an idea, that men can govern themselves through reason and law without masters or kings. This is the legacy you inherit, far more precious than land or gold. I look at each of their faces in turn, committing them to memory for whatever journey awaits me beyond death. Power is a plough, not a crown, I continue. It exists to serve others, not ourselves. When Rome called me to lead, I answered. When that duty was fulfilled, I returned to my farm. Remember this example when ambition tempts you, as it tempts all men. Their young faces register varying degrees of understanding, but I know these seeds of wisdom, planted now, may germinate in future years when they face their own tests of character. A knock at the door interrupts us. It is Titus, come to inform me that the Senate delegation grows impatient. I sigh, reluctantly accepting that even in my final days, Rome's business cannot be completely set aside. Send them in, I tell him. Let us hear what is so urgent that it cannot wait for an old farmer to die in peace. As my grandchildren file out, replaced by dignitaries in formal togas, I steel myself for one final performance of the role I never sought but accepted out of duty. Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, Rome's reluctant savior, the dictator who relinquished absolute power to return to his plough. The Senate delegation has finally departed, leaving behind elaborate promises of posthumous honors I neither desire nor deserve. They spoke of statues and memorials, of ensuring my legacy, as though my life were a political campaign requiring their management. I endured their speeches with what patience I could muster, thanking them for their consideration while deflecting their more grandiose proposals. Now I rest, exhausted by the effort of formal discourse. My daughter has returned to my side, her presence more comforting than any physician's remedy. Outside, the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the fields. Another day wanes. They never truly understood, did they? Quinta muses, following my gaze toward the window. Few men who seek power can comprehend those who do not, I reply. My mind returns to that pivotal spring day, nearly 50 years ago, when everything changed. I had been working since dawn, guiding my plough behind our only ox. The soil was good that year, rich and dark, promising a bountiful harvest if the gods favored us with adequate rain. I remember the feel of earth beneath my bare feet, the strain in my shoulders as I guided the plough. the satisfaction of watching straight furrows form behind me. Then came the sound of horses and men approaching, unusual for our small farm that lay some distance from the main road. I saw them crest the hill, a delegation of senators and magistrates, their fine togas incongruous against the rural backdrop. Even from a distance, their expressions told me this was no casual visit. I paused in my labor, wiping sweat from my brow with a forearm already caked with dirt. Rasilia emerged from our modest home, shading her eyes against the sun as she watched the approaching party. "The Senate calls for you, Lucius Quinctius," their leader announced formally as they reached me. "As you can see, I am occupied with matters of survival," I replied, gesturing to my field. "What business brings such esteemed men to my plough?" Their spokesman, Gaius Nautius, stepped forward. "Rome faces grave danger. The Aequi have broken their treaty. They've trapped Consul Minucius and his army in a mountain pass. Our forces face annihilation." I leaned against my plough, considering his words. The Aequi were long-time enemies of Rome, a mountain people whose raids had troubled our borders for generations. If they had cornered a consular army, the situation was dire indeed. "The Senate has voted," Nautius continued. "In this emergency, Rome requires a dictator. You have been chosen." I remember feeling no pride at this announcement, only a weary resignation. Dictatorship was Rome's emergency measure, invoked only in times of greatest peril. For 6 months, the dictator held absolute power, command of all armies, authority to make law without consultation, even power of life and death over citizens. It was a dangerous tool, created for dangerous times. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then Rome may fall," Nautius replied simply. Rasilia approached, carrying a clean tunic. There were no tears in her eyes, no protests from her lips, though we both knew what this would mean for our farm, our family, our carefully constructed life of simplicity. She had always understood, better than most, that privilege brings obligation. "Rome calls," she said, helping me remove my sweat-soaked work clothes. "You must answer." I bathed quickly in the water brought by the delegation's slaves, then donned the clean tunic. As I did, I felt the transformation beginning, from farmer to commander, from private citizen to the most powerful man in the Republic. It was not a comfortable metamorphosis. The journey to Rome passed in strategic discussion. The situation was even worse than initially described. The Aequi had not only trapped Minucius and his army, but were advancing on Rome itself. Our forces were divided, our leadership in disarray. The plebeians and patricians, ever at odds, were blaming each other rather than uniting against the common threat. I entered Rome not with triumph, but with purpose. The familiar sights of the Forum, the Senate House, and the temples stirred memories of my earlier political life, before Ciso's disgrace and our retreat to agricultural simplicity. The city had grown in my absence, but its problems remained familiar. Ambition, factionalism, the eternal struggle between the few and the many. The formal ceremony of investiture was brief. I stood before the assembled senators as they conferred upon me the most absolute authority any Roman could legally hold. The fasces, bundles of rods surrounding an axe, symbols of the power to punish and execute, were carried before me. doubled in number to signify my extraordinary authority. I accept this burden, I told them, not for glory or gain, but because Rome requires it. When the danger has passed, I shall return to my plough. Some nodded solemnly. Others exchanged glances that suggested skepticism. Few men willingly surrender power once they have tasted it. This was the lesson of history, from the kings Rome had overthrown to the ambitious nobles who routinely prolonged their commands through political maneuvering. That night, rather than occupy the grand residence offered to me, I returned to our family's old house in the city, long closed up, but still in our possession. Recilia joined me there, bringing only what she needed for a brief stay. Neither of us harbored illusions that this would be our home again. "They think you a fool," she said as we prepared for sleep. "A man who would give up absolute power. Then they understand neither me nor power," I replied. "And what is it that they fail to understand about power?" she asked, though she knew my mind better than anyone. "That it is a burden, not a prize. That it exists to serve Rome, not the man who wields it. That it corrupts more surely than any disease of the body." She smiled then, the same smile that had first captured my heart decades earlier. "This is why Rome needs you, husband. Not for your military skill alone, but for your understanding of what power should be." That night, I slept poorly, my dreams filled with battling armies and the faces of men I would send to their deaths in the coming days. The responsibility weighed upon me more heavily than any physical burden I had ever carried. Morning came too quickly. I rose before dawn, as had been my habit on the farm, and began the work of saving Rome. My first order as dictator was to close all shops and suspend all private business throughout the city. Rome's situation demanded that every citizen focus solely on the crisis at hand. Those too old for military service were to guard the walls. All men of fighting age were to report to the field of Mars by sunset, bringing rations for 5 days and 12 defensive stakes each. 12 stakes? Questioned Titus Abusius, a cavalry commander I had appointed as my master of horse. "The men will grumble at carrying such a load alongside their weapons and armor." "Let them grumble," I replied. "When they see my purpose, they will understand." By nightfall, an army had assembled. Not the disorganized, quarreling factions that had allowed Rome to reach this crisis, but a force united by common purpose and discipline. I addressed them not with flowery rhetoric, but with clear direction. "We march tonight," I announced. "The Aequi believe they have time to finish Minucius before turning to Rome. We will prove them wrong." We marched through darkness, covering ground that would normally require 2 days of travel. I rode at the head of the column, setting a pace that challenged even the youngest soldiers. Some commanders lead from the rear, in comfort and safety. I have always believed a leader must share the hardships he imposes. Near midnight, I called a brief halt to rest the men. As they slumped to the ground, exhausted, I walked among them, not as dictator, but as fellow soldier. I spoke with centurions about their units, with individual men about their homes and families. Leadership, I have always believed, requires knowing those you lead, not just as tools to be used, but as men with hopes and fears. Before dawn, we resumed our march, reaching the vicinity of Mount Algidus by midday. From a ridge, we could see the Roman army under Minucius, surrounded in a valley by the Equian forces. They had constructed fortifications, but were clearly besieged, unable to break out or receive supplies. "The situation is grim, dictator," observed Abutius. "The Aequi have chosen their position well." I studied the terrain, recalling hunting expeditions in these same hills during my youth. The Aequi were mountain people who believed their knowledge of the terrain gave them advantage. But no man knows all the secrets of the land. "They have surrounded Minucius completely," I said, "forming a circle with their forces." "Indeed, we cannot reach our countrymen without breaking through." "Then we shall not break through," I replied. "We shall surround those who surround." My plan was simple in concept, challenging in execution. While the Aequi focused on containing Minucius, we would build a circumvallation, a ring of fortifications around the entire Equian force. The 12 stakes each man carried would form the foundation of this wall. "We will become the trap surrounding the trappers," I explained to my officers. "Cut off from supplies, retreat, or reinforcement. They must either fight us at a disadvantage or surrender." Work began immediately. Our men dug trenches, erected palisades, and constructed watchtowers in a great circle encompassing both the Equian army and the beleaguered forces of Minucius. I moved continuously around the growing fortifications, encouraging, correcting, and working alongside the men when hands were needed. By sunset, our ring was complete. As darkness fell, I ordered fires lit along our entire circumference, hundreds of blazes that illuminated our position while blinding the enemy to our numbers and dispositions. Then, at my command, the entire Roman army raised a great shout, a wall of sound that echoed across the valley. Inside their double trap, the Aequi stirred in confusion. Their scouts brought reports of our encirclement. Their leaders debated responses. Meanwhile, Minucius and his men, seeing our fires and hearing our battle cries, gained new hope. I sent a messenger through enemy lines, a young soldier who volunteered to crawl through the darkness with my instructions for Minucius. By morning, both Roman forces would attack simultaneously, catching the Aequi between hammer and anvil. That night, as my men rested in rotation, I walked our perimeter, checking defenses and speaking with sentries. One young guard, no more than 18, stood straighter as I approached. "At ease, soldier," I told him. "Save your strength for tomorrow's battle." "Dictator," he responded, relaxing slightly. "May I ask a question?" I nodded. "My father says you once held high office before retiring to your farm. Is that true?" "It is. I served as consul many years ago." "Then why return to farming? Surely a man of your standing could have remained in Rome in comfort and influence." I looked across the darkened valley, where thousands of men waited for morning's battle. Romans and Aequi alike, men with families, hopes, and futures now placed in the balance of war. "There is honor in working the land," I told him. "The soil demands honesty. You cannot deceive it with clever words or political alliances. It rewards diligence and punishes neglect. These are lessons many in power would do well to learn." "But surely farming is harder than political life," he persisted. I smiled at his youth. Physical labor tires the body, but refreshes the spirit. Political labor often does the opposite. Remember that, should you survive tomorrow and someday face such choices. Dawn brought the battle I had planned. On my signal, our forces attacked from the outer ring, while Minucius led his men in a sortie from their entrenchments. The Aequi, caught between, fought bravely but without hope. By midday, their commander, Cloelius Gracchus, approached under flag of truce, offering surrender. I accepted their capitulation, but imposed harsh terms. The Equian leaders would pass under the yoke, a symbolic humiliation where defeated enemies walk beneath a spear supported by two others, stooping to signify their subjugation. Their army would surrender weapons, but otherwise be spared. "You are generous, dictator," Gracchus said bitterly as he prepared to undergo this ritual. "Not generous," I corrected him. "Practical. Dead enemies cannot learn the folly of attacking Rome. Living ones, properly humbled, become cautionary tales to their children." With the Aequi defeated, I turned my attention to Minucius and his army. They had been rescued, but their failure had necessitated that rescue. Discipline required acknowledgement of this fact. "Consul Minucius," I addressed him formally before both armies, "you will relinquish your command and serve as my legate until this campaign concludes. Your army will be reorganized under new centurions." His face flushed with shame, but he accepted my judgment without protest. Later, in private, I offered context for my decision. "A commander who cannot lead must learn to follow," I told him. "This is not punishment, but education. Rome needs leaders who understand both roles." The campaign concluded swiftly after the main Equian force surrendered. Small detachments were defeated or dispersed, stolen property recovered, and Roman authority reasserted throughout the contested territories. 16 days after being named dictator, I led our combined armies back to Rome in triumph. The city prepared the traditional honors, a formal triumph with procession, games, and celebrations that might last for days. The Senate gathered to vote me extraordinary rewards, perhaps grants of land or money, as was customary for victorious commanders. I declined them all. "Rome's danger is past," I announced before the assembled Senate. "The emergency that necessitated a dictator no longer exists. Therefore, I resign this office and its powers, effective immediately." Silence greeted this declaration. Even those who had known me for decades seemed surprised by the totality of my renunciation. In Roman history, men given power typically found reasons to extend it, not curtail it. "At least remain for the triumph," urged Nautius, who had first brought me the Senate's summons. "The people wish to honor you." "The greatest honor is to serve when needed and step aside when not," I replied. "I have a spring planting to complete." That evening, as promised, I departed Rome, returning to my 4 acres and the plough I had left standing in mid-furrow. The transition from supreme commander to farmer occurred as simply as changing from toga back to tunic. Power, I have always believed, is like a cloak, meant to be worn in inclement weather, then set aside when the storm passes. Rasilia was waiting when I arrived home near midnight. She had prepared a simple meal, bread, cheese, olives from our own trees, and set it before me without ceremony. "Rome is saved, then?" she asked, though she had already heard the news from messengers. "For now," I replied. Until the next crisis, the next call for emergency powers. And will you answer if they call again? I considered this as I ate, savouring the honest flavours of food produced by our own labour, if duty requires it. But my hope is that others learn the lesson, that power serves Rome best when held temporarily and relinquished willingly. That night, I slept more soundly than during any night of my dictatorship. The weight of absolute authority had been set aside. I was, once again, simply a Roman farmer, which was all I had ever wished to be. The years following my dictatorship were among the most peaceful of my life. Each day followed the natural rhythms of the farm, rising with the sun, working until dusk, resting when darkness fell. Rasilia and I watched our children grow, taught them the skills they would need to manage their own households someday, and enjoyed the simple pleasures denied to those consumed by ambition. Our modest farm prospered, not through expansion, but through careful stewardship. We added a few olive trees, improved our small vineyard, and maintained a garden that provided most of our vegetables. The surplus we sold at market, earning enough to meet our modest needs without accumulating wealth that might attract political attention or reawaken ambitions better left dormant. News from Rome reached us through visitors and the occasional messenger. The eternal struggle between patricians and plebeians continued, with small advances and retreats on both sides. Foreign threats emerged and receded. New men rose to prominence while others fell from favour. The great wheel of politics turned as it always had. I followed these developments with interest, but without involvement. My days of public service, I believed, had ended. At 52, I had earned my retirement from state affairs. Younger men could now carry the burden of leadership. But Rome, it seemed, was not finished with me. It was early summer, nearly 10 years after my campaign against the Equi. The wheat stood tall in our fields, the olive trees showed promise of a good harvest, and the vineyard required constant attention as the grapes formed. I was inspecting the vines when I heard the now familiar sound of an official delegation approaching. "Not again," murmured Rasilia, who had been working alongside me. The party that crested the hill was larger than the previous one. More senators, more lictors carrying the fasces, more ceremony. Their expressions carried the same urgent gravity I had seen a decade earlier. "The Senate and people of Rome require your service again, Lucius Quinctius," announced their leader, a young senator named Quintus Servilius. "Rome has many capable men," I replied, continuing to examine a vine that showed signs of disease. "Surely, one of them can address whatever situation concerns you." "None with your particular reputation," Servilius said. "We face not external enemies this time, but internal division that threatens to tear the Republic apart." He explained the crisis. Spurius Maelius, a wealthy plebeian knight, had been using his fortune to buy grain during a shortage and distribute it free to the commons. This apparent generosity masked dangerous ambition. According to informants, Maelius was stockpiling weapons in his home and plotting to make himself king. The consul Quinctius Capitolinus, recommends you specifically, Servilius continued. The people trust you as a man who has held absolute power and willingly relinquished it. They will accept your judgment where they might reject another's. I looked toward Rasilia, whose expression told me what I already knew. Duty rarely arrives at convenient moments. One day, I told Servilius, Rome must learn to solve its crises without recalling old men from their ploughs. Today is not that day, he replied. And so, for the second time, I set aside my farmer's tools and donned the mantle of dictator. Once more, I entered Rome, accepted the doubled fasces, and assumed the awful responsibility of holding life and death power over my fellow citizens. This crisis proved more complex than the Equian invasion. Military threats are straightforward. Armies clash. One prevails. Terms are dictated. Political conspiracies involve nuance, uncertainty, questions of evidence and intent. Was Maelius truly plotting revolution, or merely engaging in populist politics that threatened the patrician order? I established a tribunal in the Forum, summoning witnesses and examining evidence. The case against Maelius grew stronger with each testimony, secret meetings, coded messages, promises of position to supporters once the new order was established. Most damning were the weapons discovered in his cellar, enough to arm hundreds. When sufficient evidence had been gathered, I sent Gaius Servilius Ahala, my master of horse, to summon Maelius to the tribunal. Maelius refused, attempting to rally his supporters in the Forum against what he called patrician persecution. What happened next remains controversial in Rome. Ahala, seeing Maelius inciting the crowd and fearing the beginning of armed insurrection, drew his sword and killed him on the spot. Some called it execution without trial, others necessary preventive action against a would-be tyrant. When news reached me, I immediately convened the assembly to address the public before rumors could spark violence. Spurius Maelius was summoned to answer charges of plotting against the Republic, I announced from the rostra. He refused that summons and attempted to raise the people against lawful authority. His death, while regrettable, was justified by his actions. To demonstrate the seriousness of the conspiracy, I ordered Maelius's house demolished and his grain distributed through official channels. His name would stand as warning to any who might consider setting themselves above the law. The crisis resolved more quickly than the Equian invasion, 21 days from my appointment to the restoration of normal government. As before, I resigned my powers immediately upon completing my task, declining honors and returning to my farm without ceremony. This time, however, the transition back to private life carried greater weight. I was over 50 years old, and the physical demands of dictatorship, long days of hearings, sleepless nights, considering evidence and strategy, the constant tension of holding ultimate responsibility, had taken their toll. This must be the last time, I told Rasilia, as we walked our fields the day after my return. I am too old now for Rome to call again. She took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine as they had countless times over our years together. Rome will always need men who understand power's proper use. But yes, let younger men carry that burden now. The seasons turned, one into another, as they had since time immemorial. We witnessed 4 more harvests together before Rasilia fell ill during a harsh winter. For 3 months, she fought the wasting disease, showing the same quiet strength that had defined her life. When death finally claimed her, it was as if the central pillar of my world had been removed. Plant something that will bloom in spring, she told me in her final days. I would not have you look only at barren earth when thinking of me. I honored her request, planting flowering almond trees near our home that would blossom around the anniversary of her passing. When the pink flowers appear each year, I speak to her as if she still walks beside me. Perhaps, in some way, she does. Now, as I lie in this bed, awaiting my own journey to the afterworld, I can see those trees through my window. They have grown strong, their roots deep, their branches reaching skyward, much like the republic I served when called and gladly left when my service was complete. The afternoon wanes as I rest from the morning's exertions. My grandson Marcus sits with me now, having volunteered to watch while the others see to various tasks. At 7, he is too young to fully comprehend death's approach, yet old enough to sense its importance. He sits quietly beside my bed, occasionally glancing up from the wooden horse he whittles with surprising skill for one so young. "Grandfather," he says suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between us, "is it true you were a king?" I smile at the directness of childhood. "No, Marcus. Rome has evolved past the need for kings. But you were dictator. Twice. My tutor says a dictator has all the power of kings, and more. Having power and being wise in its use are different matters," I tell him. "Would you like to hear a story about power?" He nods eagerly, setting aside his carving. "When I was a young man," I begin, "not much older than your father is now, I once hunted a great boar in the forests near Tiber. For 3 days I tracked it, sleeping under stars, eating what I could forage. Finally, I cornered the beast in a rocky gully." Marcus leans forward, enthralled. The boar charged, as they always do when threatened. I had my spear ready, braced against the ground. My aim was true. The point entered just behind its shoulder, driving deep into its heart. But as it died, its momentum carried it forward, and one of its tusks gashed my leg badly. I pull back the blanket to show him the long, pale scar still visible on my thigh after all these decades. I was alone, far from help, leg bleeding heavily. Night approached. Wolves would come, drawn by the blood. Death seemed certain. "But you lived," Marcus interjects. "Indeed." I cut strips from my tunic, bound the wound, then used my hunting knife and the shaft of my broken spear to fashion a crutch. For 2 days, I hobbled through forest and field, sleeping in trees to avoid predators, until I reached a shepherd's hut where I received help. "That's a good story, grandfather. But what does it have to do with power?" "Everything," I reply. "Power, whether a dictator's authority or a hunter's spear, is a tool for specific circumstances. I needed the spear to hunt the boar, but afterward, broken and bloodied, it became something else entirely, material for survival of a different kind. So too with political power. It exists to address specific threats, not to be held indefinitely for its own sake. He considers this, his young brow furrowed in concentration. So you gave up being dictator because the danger was gone, like throwing away a broken spear after the hunt. Not throwing away, I correct gently. Transforming. The spear became a crutch that saved my life in a new way. Power returned to its proper constitutional channels serves Rome better than power concentrated in one man's hands, no matter how benevolent he believes himself to be. Marcus nods, though I suspect the subtleties escape him. No matter, the seed is planted. In time, as he grows and faces his own relationship with authority, perhaps he will recall an old man's lesson. Titus enters, bringing me a cup of watered wine recommended by the physician. He smiles at his son, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. Has grandfather been telling his hunting stories again? He asks. About power, Marcus answers seriously. And broken spears. Titus raises an eyebrow at me. Politics disguised as adventure? Subtle, father. The best lessons often arrive disguised, I reply, accepting the cup and drinking slowly. The wine eases the persistent ache in my chest. Besides, a boy should know his grandfather was once capable of more than lying in bed and dispensing wisdom. When Marcus leaves, Titus takes his place beside me. Of all my children, he most resembles me in temperament, steady, practical, content with agricultural life, rather than seeking prominence in Rome's political arena. The physician says it will not be long now, Titus says quietly. Days, perhaps. Are you comfortable? As comfortable as this final journey permits, I assure him. I have few regrets, which is more than most men my age can claim. And what regrets remain? He asks. I consider this, that I could not save your brother Saso from his own pride, that Rome continues to struggle with the same conflicts between wealth and poverty, privilege and exclusion that troubled it in my youth, that men still mistake power for accomplishment, mistrust for wisdom. You showed a different path, Titus says. Twice you held absolute authority and twice relinquished it willingly. History will remember this example. Examples instruct only those willing to learn, I reply. Already I hear of generals prolonging their commands through political maneuvering, of magistrates using office to enrich themselves, of noble families treating the republic as personal property. Then what hope is there? Titus asks, genuine concern in his voice. Hope resides in the Roman character, I tell him. In our best moments, we value duty above desire, service above self-interest. So long as some remember this, farmers and senators alike, the Republic will endure. Our conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the physician, come to examine me again. His prodding and questions exhaust what little strength I have left. When he departs, promising to return in the morning, I find myself drifting between sleep and wakefulness, memory and present moment blurring like colours in a weaver's loom. I see again the battlefields of my youth, the Senate chamber during heated debates, the simple pleasure of walking my land at sunset. Faces appear, Rasilia in her prime, laughing as we harvested olives together. Saso, bright with promise before ambition led him astray. Countless soldiers who served under my command, some living to old age, others sacrificed to Rome's necessities. What defines a life well lived? As darkness approaches, this question occupies my thoughts. Not wealth. I die with little more than I began with. Not power. I held it briefly and relinquished it gladly. Not even family, though mine has brought immeasurable joy. Perhaps it is consistency between belief and action, between private virtue and public service. The same hands that guided my plough also directed armies. The same principles that governed my household informed state policy when duty called me to leadership. I drift deeper into memory, traveling back to the day I officially ended my second dictatorship. After the formal resignation before the Senate, I walked alone through the forum, making my way toward the city gates and the farm beyond. An elderly plebeian stopped me, a man I didn't recognize, weathered by life's hardships. "They say you could have been king," he said, without preamble. "They say many foolish things," I replied. "Is it foolish? With your reputation, the army loyal to you, the Senate divided, you could have taken power permanently. Many would have supported you. And would Rome have benefited?" I asked him. He considered this. "Perhaps not Rome, but you would have lived in luxury, your family elevated beyond others, your name first among all Romans. At what cost? My self-respect? Rome's liberty? The example I set for my children?" I shook my head. "Too high a price for gilded chains, old man." He studied me, as if trying to determine whether my words were sincere or merely the practiced virtue of a politician. Finally, he nodded. "My father told me of the early days of the Republic, when men took power reluctantly and yielded it gladly. I thought those days long past." "They need not be," I told him, "if enough of us remember what made Rome worth fighting for." With that, I continued my journey, leaving the marble magnificence of public Rome for the honest earth of my farm. I never learned the old man's name, but his question has stayed with me through the decades, a reminder that each generation faces the same fundamental choice between power's temptation and duty's demands. Morning light streams through my window, another day granted by whatever gods govern our allotted time. I feel weaker than yesterday, the simple act of breathing now requiring conscious effort. My family has gathered, speaking in hushed tones just beyond my door. They know, as I do, that few such mornings remain to me. Lucius, my eldest grandson, now a respected centurion in Rome's legions, enters carrying a scroll sealed with the Senate's mark. "More posthumous honors?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of a sort," he replies, breaking the seal. "They wish to create a new tradition. Future dictators will be instructed to follow the example of Cincinnatus when taking and relinquishing emergency powers." I close my eyes, considering this. Words inscribed on parchment mean little unless the character exists to honor them. "Still," Lucius persists, "your name will stand for centuries as the model of proper leadership." Perhaps this is true, Perhaps not. The future will unfold according to its own necessity, beyond my influence or concern. What matters now are the final words I leave with those who will carry forward not just my bloodline, but the principles that guided my actions. Bring them in, I tell Lucius, all of them. I would speak to our family together. He nods and soon returns with the entire household. My surviving children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren, the youngest barely able to walk. They arrange themselves around my bed, faces solemn yet composed. Romans do not wail and tear their garments at death's approach. We face it with the same dignity we strive to bring to life. I have been fortunate, I begin, each word measured to conserve strength, to live 83 years in interesting times. I have seen Rome threatened and Rome triumphant. I have held the highest power our republic offers and returned contentedly to the humblest labor. From these experiences, I offer you not commands, but observations. I pause, gathering strength for what must be my final lesson to them. Power exists to serve others, not ourselves. When used for personal gain or glory, it becomes corruption, no matter how legal its form. Remember that the simplest farmer who tends his land honestly contributes more to Rome's greatness than the most ambitious general who conquers for personal fame. My gaze moves from face to face, memorizing these people who carry my blood, and I hope, something of my understanding. Wealth beyond necessity breeds more desire, not more contentment. I die with modest possessions, but rich in the knowledge that I never sacrificed principle for profit. This farm, small though it may be, has provided everything a reasonable life requires. A fit of coughing interrupts me. Quinta offers water, supporting my head as I drink. When the spasm passes, I continue, though my voice has weakened further. Above all, remember that Rome is not eternal by divine right, but only through the virtue of its citizens. Each generation must earn the Republic anew through sacrifice, restraint, and commitment to something larger than individual ambition. I feel consciousness beginning to fade, darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. One final thought must be expressed before I surrender to the journey ahead. I do not fear death, I tell them, for I have lived according to nature's law and Rome's highest ideals. The body returns to earth, as the plough returns to the soil after the day's labor. This is proper, this is right. My daughter Quinta takes my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Rest now, Father. We will remember. I manage a slight nod, then turn my gaze to the window where I can see my fields one last time. The wheat stands tall, another harvest approaching. The cycle continues, planting, growth, harvest, fallow period, then renewal. So too with Rome, with families, with individual lives. My breathing slows. The room seems to fill with light, not just morning sun, but something more profound. Is this death's approach, or merely an old man's failing senses? It matters little. I see Rasilia waiting, young again as when we first met, standing at the edge of a field, ready for ploughing. Behind her stretches land more beautiful than any earthly farm, straight furrows extending toward distant mountains, golden wheat swaying in eternal summer breeze. My true reward, not Senate honors or historical recognition, but reunion with she who shared my life's purpose. The furrow is complete, I whisper, though whether any living ear hears these final words, I cannot know. I release my hold on this world and step toward her, ready to begin the next great labor, the next sacred duty. Behind me, I leave a family schooled in virtue, a republic shown the path of proper leadership, and fields that will continue to bear fruit long after my name fades from memory. This is legacy enough for any Roman farmer. And thus passed Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, twice dictator of Rome, in the 83rd year of his life, 430 BC. No elaborate tomb marks his resting place, only a simple marker among the fields he loved. Yet his example of power accepted reluctantly, wielded judiciously, and relinquished willingly, remains. 2,000 years later, when new republics would form across distant oceans, they would still look to Cincinnatus as the model of civic virtue and proper leadership, the citizen who served when called and returned to his plough when duty was done. Sadly, there may never be another of his like.